Where to begin? Well, I'll start when I first saw the ad on Craigslist. It stated that the person was looking for a responsible and hardworking person to edit wedding films in the Philadelphia area. I'd been into film since I was 5, and at the time, I was working as a cashier at a local grocery store. So I felt this was my chance to finally get a prestigious job as a filmmaker. I responded to the ad and got a response in a few days. He told me his business. I looked up his films and they were genius. I have never seen such high quality wedding films. They really told a story and I was intrigued. A few days later, we planned an interview. It was a dreary day when I went to his worn-down apartment in a city that was local, but not in the best part of town. As I walked out of my car, he greeted me at the door. He seemed nice, but I felt a little off. I'm very good at sensing people's emotions, and for some reason, I couldn't sense normalcy in the way that he acted. It was strange. He did everything that was considered professional outside, and then we walked up to his apartment and office. He was 23 at the time, a self-made entrepreneur, a wedding film business. I remember one of the first things that he said to me. "If you work for me, I won't teach you just about video. I'm going to teach you about life." Being the naive 21-year-old I was, I thought this guy was just a really good businessman. Sure, he sounded full of himself, but what boss isn't? I got the job and was ecstatic. I felt on top of the world working for one of the best videographers in the Philadelphia area. I came into work the next day and ended up working on one of those TV dinner tables with a computer on it and a rickety chair. I didn't care. I was doing what I loved and it was awesome. A few months go by and I started noticing his weird behavior. I remember a specific time when his sister came over to visit him, and I met her for the first time. She wanted to get to know me, so she kept asking me questions about my life and trying to make jokes with me, but he wasn't having it. This was the first time that I sensed that something was seriously wrong with my boss. As his sister would try to engage me in conversation, he would tell me to shut up and do my work. Apparently, a 5-minute conversation was too much time to be wasted. I quickly learned the editing program, as I've edited extensively in the past. I eventually was editing 1 to 2 films a week, and despite my boss being sort of strange, I thought it was still the job for me. This was when the craziness had started. I started to learn the DSLR cameras. I began learning his basics of editing skills in his films. I'm very talented in video editing, but sometimes it takes weeks or even months to learn how a particular company goes about their editing. The first thing I noticed is that he had clinical depression. He would look to me to support him and make him happy again. I thought I was being a good friend or employee by offering sympathy because of the fact that I've been suffering from depression since I was 12. Eventually, the therapy sessions became a little uncomfortable. He would put his arm around me, despite the fact that I had been with my boyfriend for 3 years. One time, he got me so high on marijuana that I couldn't stand on my own 2 feet. To me, it didn't matter. My boyfriend smoked weed, and this was a great time to finally get into something that he enjoyed too. As the months went on, I started to notice things that I didn't before. He was working behind a huge mahogany desk with a large screen, while I was working on a TV dinner table on a small laptop editing most of his films. So then came the shooting part. I began to learn the basics of shooting a wedding, getting the right shots and the right lighting. It was then that I started to realize this man was unstable and possibly aggressive. There were nights when we would do a same-day edit. These were 3-minute videos that the company would create for the couple and show at the end of the evening. It was a stressful environment. He was usually the one editing these same-day edits in the beginning, but the pressure was terribly strong. I would film with people that he knew for years that had their own video companies. I was ignored, I was the outcast, and I sort of followed them around. I felt useless, but I held on knowing that eventually I would learn the trade. As the months passed, I was his main editor. I edited all the films, chose all the music, and sometimes would lead my own shoots when he had another shoot somewhere else. I found myself to be extremely talented. I knew how to make a film beautiful, and how to make a story of love meaningful. I noticed that he loved to criticize me over time. If it wasn't the audio, it was the video. If it wasn't the video, it was the lighting. If it wasn't the lighting, it was the photography. If it wasn't that, it was me. I began to beat myself up. How could I not be good enough when I was trying my absolute hardest? Was I a failure? Should I even be in this field? There were a few more same-day edits that my boss would do the edit on. It was extremely stressful because I had to make sure we had all the awesome shots we needed in order to make a fantastic film. Eventually, I edited my own same-day edit. I cried because of their reaction. I feel I'm a pretty sympathetic person, so I saw their happiness and felt whole when I saw that. Despite the pressure, I continued on with my job, but as I continued, I noticed more aggressive behavior on his behalf. He would start hitting on me, flirting endlessly and giving me back rubs. Do you know how creepy it is to get a back rub from your boss inside of his own house? It was a small business, so that's where we worked, out of his own home. It started becoming more of a hangout session rather than work. He would tell me about his low self-esteem and would somehow work his way into putting his arm around me. I felt extremely uncomfortable during these times, but I was naive, and I had no idea how to approach the situation. Eventually, he became an angry person. He would scream at me in the car or belittle me at a shoot. I felt like I was nothing and that I was an idiot. I felt that I would never become the amazing filmmaker that this man had become. He constantly belittled my edits. He would say, "The film is boring and you need to redo it." But all the while he was on his computer surfing the internet, while I edited these films to perfection. Over time, I realized I was doing everything besides booking the gigs. I was editing the film, I was burning the DVDs, I was posting blogs, and I was shooting weddings, and I was dealing with this man. The man that made me feel like I was small. Eventually, I started standing up to him. He didn't like that. How dare someone challenge his ideals? I noticed when I did question his ideas that he would become aggressive. He acted as if because he was 2 years older than me and owned his own business that I was a schmuck, and without him I would be nothing. The flirting and belittling continued. I was told that I was not meant to be with my boyfriend. He started becoming more physical, trying to connect with me by introducing me to sci-fi shows. I enjoyed them, and I believe this was his way of having a hobby between him and I that I did not have between my boyfriend and I. And so, the physical contact went on, and I, a naive kid, thought he just didn't realize social norms. He was socially screwed up and had to read books about how to be a good person, and how to persuade people to do things. I thought he didn't realize that touching your employee over and over again wasn't the right way to go about things. No, I was wrong. He knew exactly what he was doing. Over time, he continued to touch me. He would massage my shoulders and he would insist on a huge, much longer than a normal hug. He was in the pickup artist industry, and after a while, I felt like his prey. Eventually, I started standing up for myself and becoming equally aggressive towards him. I began telling him that I wasn't comfortable with his touching. I called him out on his BS. I told him his yelling at shoots was irresponsible and cruel. I mentioned that his personality was narcissistic because he wanted to know what I thought he was. I told him that he was socially messed up and that it was pathetic, that he had to read a book to understand how to be nicer to another human. He eventually accepted what he was, I think, because at this point, things started getting worse. There was an instance when I couldn't find the car where he parked to retrieve his cell phone. He was waiting at the front desk at his venue to figure out which room the bride was in. It was about a 15-minute walk to the garage, and when I got there, I started panicking because I couldn't remember which floor we had parked on. We eventually ran into each other and he immediately started screaming at me in the elevator, with 2 people in there as witnesses. "It's floor 5, how could you not know that? We park there every time." My boss yelled at me so loud that the 2 men in the elevator were noticeably scared. When they left, I told them that I was quitting once and for all. I couldn't stand this anymore, the yelling, the belittling, the nonsense. I was done. 2 weeks later, I was working on an edit on a laptop at his house. It would be about a month until I was out of there. I know I was being very generous with my time, but I was trying to do the right thing. I remember distinctly him talking to me, joking around, and then grabbing a pocket knife on his table which had been fully extracted. He held it to my neck. He tried to play it off as if he were joking, but I knew that he wasn't. I joked with him so he would release the knife. For the rest of the night, I was incredibly scared, but I wasn't about to tell him. Remember, this is a sociopath. He gets off on fear and he gets off on power. Finally, the knife was away from my throat, and for the rest of the night, I played the loyal employee. This is when I finally said, "This is it." I was scared for my life. When is it ever okay to put a knife to a person's throat, no matter how well you know them? It scared the crap out of me, and in a week I told him that I was leaving his company. He was enraged. He pounded on his steering wheel as I told him this in the car. This reminded me of the time we went to NYC to shoot a huge wedding, and on the way home he freaked out because he kept taking the wrong exits. He pounded the steering wheel that night, was driving erratically, and was verbally abusing me apparently for not reading Google Maps correctly. I don't own an iPhone and never have. I don't know how to use them very well, so I guess I was the idiot. Not the guy who I was in the car with who kept taking the wrong exits. I was stuck in a car with a madman. I just couldn't take it anymore. The knife, the yelling, the touching, everything. I eventually left this job and got a job with a mutual business friend. I can't explain to you the fear I felt with that knife to my neck. At that moment I realized that I was definitely working with a psychopath, and that I would be killed if I did not leave that situation immediately. To this day, I haven't talked to him in about 2 years. He ruined a huge part of who I am. I used to trust people and I used to believe in those who had a dream. But this man, I could go on for hours about all the terrible things he has done. I barely even cover the evil things this man has done to me. Some backstory. My parents split when I was about 14. It wasn't a good breakup and my dad was an abusive drug addict. So when my mom left him, she was in a really bad place. Her and my older sister kept taking her to local bars since my mom was depressed. This led to my mom becoming an alcoholic since my sister was well on her way to becoming one too. During one of these nights, she met a guy. I didn't know much about him, just that they met him and his brother at a bar and now she was dating him. It went pretty fast and my sister would flirt with the brother to get free food and drinks from him. Around this time, I was about 15 and this dude just seemed off. He was probably early 40s or so and he was always going on my mom's dates with his brother. He just kind of hung around a lot. One day, my sister decided she wanted sushi and called the brother up to take us because she knew that he would pay. I didn't want to go, but we didn't have food in the house and I was hungry. We didn't have a sushi place in our town, so we had to drive to the city, which was about 30 minutes away. The entire ride, I just had this warning feeling in my stomach that kept telling me to get out of the car, that this was a bad idea. I was a giant ball of anxiety the whole 30 minutes. My sister sat in the front seat, completely oblivious to what was happening. Meanwhile, I kept catching him staring at me in the rearview mirror. Once we got to the restaurant, he sat himself directly across from me. He wanted to sit next to me, but I rushed to sit next to my sister instead. It was awkward, but my sister talked a lot, so I was kind of able to hide. Eventually, she got up to go to the bathroom, and then I was all alone with him. Almost immediately, he asked me if I had a boyfriend, and I said no. "That's good," he said. "You're too good for the high school boys. They're only after one thing." I just nodded, not knowing what to say. He then went on to ask if I liked Disneyland, and I said yes. He got excited and went on about how he would take me, but hotels were expensive, so we would probably have to share a room. It would just be us, so my mom and his brother could be alone. He said my sister couldn't come though because he couldn't afford to pay for us all to go. At this point, I was extremely uncomfortable, and I just wanted my sister to come back. She finally did, and he switched to just talking to her. She didn't notice anything was wrong or that he kept looking at me. Once we had finished, he took us home and invited himself in. I went to my room and I locked the door and hid. At one point, someone tried to open my door, but they stopped once they felt that it was locked. My mom and her boyfriend came home around then. I tried talking to my sister, but she brushed me off. They had invited us back to their house, and I wanted so badly to stay home, but they forced me to go too. Almost immediately, my mom and her boyfriend went to the room and left my sister and I with them. He got my sister drunk pretty fast and tried to get me to drink, but I kept refusing. It got to the point where my sister was almost blacked out drunk, and I was freaking out because once she passed out, it would just be us. I started texting my brothers hoping that one of them would be able to pick me up. Thank God my oldest brother responded. I told him what was happening and he came to get me. He showed up and told the guy that it was late and that I had school, so he was taking me home. He tried to protest, but my brother was very firm about it. He loaded my sister in the car, texted my mom that he was taking us home, and then we left. My brother didn't live with us since he was about 30 at the time and had his own family, so he didn't know what was going on. I told him the full story and he got really quiet, and then waited until my mom got home. He told her off, shamed her for putting me in that situation, and told her that if it continued, he would move me into his house. My mom broke down then and told him that she wanted to break up with her boyfriend because of his brother. I found out when I was older that he would sneak by the door to listen to them when they had sex. I think more happened, but my mom never talked about it more than that. She broke up with him, got a good job, and sobered up with the help of my brother. It took my sister a lot longer, but she eventually got her life back together. Okay, to preface this, here's a little backstory. At the time of this incident, I was 17 years old and a senior in high school. I rode the school bus sometimes when my friend didn't drive me home. This is what happened that day. I got off my school bus at my street, and the stop was at an intersection between my street and the highway. My street isn't a big street, it only has about 7 houses, and every person on my street is a business owner. I know all my neighbors. Well, I got off my bus, and while I'm walking towards my street, a white van pulls up and stops in front of the bus. The van had tinted windows and those sometimes illegal tints on the front window as well. Well, I walked onto my street and the bus drove away. And once the bus went away, the van turned onto my street. It drove slow and kept with me. I immediately was just like, oh, absolutely not. Because kidnapping is a big thing in my state. I saw the car stop right next to me, and that's when I ran. I ran across one of my neighbor's lawns as I heard the man in the van open his door. I went on the phone and turned on Moonlight, an app where if I let go of the button on the screen, it immediately sent police to my location. I ran as fast as I could and hid for 10 minutes, waiting for the van to drive away. Once the van left, I went to my house and told my parents, and we called the police. The police came, interviewed me, and told me that there had been sightings of that car all around town, and there were even a few disappearances linked to it. It's been about a year and nothing has happened, and I'm beyond happy about that fact.